For more than 2 decades, he believed that trust was the greatest value inside a company. But on a grey afternoon, he discovered he had been betrayed by the very person who shook his hand the tightest. When everything seemed lost, a 5-year-old girl quietly entered his office and rearranged what he thought was broken forever. "It's not mine, and my mum says taking what isn't ours makes God upset." And with that sentence, she saved something greater than any fortune, his faith in humanity. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. And now on with the story. Robert Anderson had always prided himself on being a man of his word. At 48, he had built Anderson Corporate Solutions from the ground up, an administrative services and consulting firm that occupied 2 floors of a commercial building in the City of London. 23 years of hard work, sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends, and an impeccable reputation in the market. He was the kind of entrepreneur who knew each of his 62 employees by name, who asked about their families, who remembered birthdays. He trusted people because he believed that if you treated those who worked with you well, you would receive the same in return. But life has a peculiar way of teaching us that not all certainties hold true. It all began on a rainy Tuesday in June, one of those days when the London sky turns grey early on and the city feels heavier. Robert had almost cancelled the annual audit. It was just a formality after all. The numbers always added up, the cash flow was stable, clients paid on time. Why waste time and money on something that never pointed to any problems? But the accountant insisted, saying it was important to maintain discipline, and he somewhat reluctantly agreed. The auditor was a white-haired gentleman named Maurice, serious and methodical, who arrived with his worn leather briefcase and began reviewing spreadsheets, bank statements, and tax documents. Robert barely paid attention, too busy answering emails and preparing a proposal for a new client. It was only late in the afternoon, when Maurice knocked on his office door with a grave expression, that Robert felt the first tightening in his chest. The auditor's words fell like stones. Financial irregularities, misappropriation of funds, unauthorized transfers, parallel accounts. At first, Robert thought there must be a mistake, some entry error, a simple mix-up. But when Maurice opened the folders and began to show the numbers, reality took shape with cruel clarity. Over the course of nearly 5 years, someone from inside the company had embezzled sums amounting to over £800,000. Not all at once, but little by little, in small installments that went unnoticed, disguised as payments to fictitious suppliers, non-existent bonuses, and expenses that never actually occurred. The name that appeared most frequently on the documents was Roger Taylor, the financial manager. The same Roger whom Robert greeted every morning, who always had a joke ready, who seemed dedicated and efficient. Roger who knew every penny that came in and out of the company, who had access to passwords, digital signatures, and bank accounts. Roger, in whom Robert had placed his blind trust for years. The discovery was like a punch to the gut. Robert dismissed Maurice, asked him to prepare a full report, and remained alone in his office, looking out at the city lights that were beginning to twinkle outside. He felt anger, of course, but more than that he felt a deep sadness, a kind of disappointment that hurts in a different way. It wasn't just the money, it was the feeling of having been played for a fool, of having believed in someone who was, all along, laughing on the inside while deceiving him. In the following days, everything turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. Lawyers were hired, documents were gathered, the police were called. Roger was called into a meeting and, faced with the evidence, didn't even try to deny it. He just turned pale, stammered a few meaningless excuses, and was escorted out of the building. The investigation revealed that he wasn't alone. 2 other employees from the finance department were also involved, creating a web of complicity that operated with the precision of a Swiss watch. Robert took all the necessary legal action, of course, but the damage was done. And it wasn't a financial damage that he could simply recover with time and work. It was something deeper, more painful. He began to look at everyone around him with suspicion. Every smile seemed false. Every greeting seemed rehearsed. Every gesture of cordiality seemed to hide ulterior motives. Did true honesty actually exist in the world? Or Was everyone just waiting for the right opportunity to take advantage? It was in this state of mind that Robert began to notice someone who had always been there, but whom he had never truly seen. Lucy Scott, the office cleaner. She was in her early 30s, thin, with the tired face of someone who sleeps too little and works too much. She always arrived very early, before 6 in the morning, when the building was still empty and silent. She cleaned the hallways, emptied the bins, organized the meeting rooms. She did everything with a quiet efficiency without drawing attention, without expecting recognition. Robert knew from vague comments he had heard over the years that she was a single mother. She was raising a little girl on her own, without help from the father, without family nearby. Sometimes, on days when there was no school or when she had no one to leave the child with, Lucy brought her to the office. The girl would sit quietly in the reception area with a drawing pad and some colored pencils. She never made a sound, never touched anything, never asked anyone for anything. She just drew, focused, with that strange seriousness some children have. Robert didn't know the girl's name, he had never spoken to her, but in that moment of crisis, of lost faith in people, that child began to catch his attention in a strange way. Perhaps because she was too small to pretend, too young to calculate. Or perhaps because, amidst so much cynicism and betrayal, she represented something he had forgotten existed: innocence. It was then that Robert had an idea. He didn't know exactly why he had this idea, nor what he hoped to prove with it. Maybe it was a test for the world, or maybe it was a test for himself, a desperate attempt to find some sign that not all was lost. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the office was nearly empty. Most of the employees had left early for an external meeting. Robert locked his office door, opened the safe embedded in the wall behind his desk, and began to take out stacks of cash. They were 20 and 50-pound notes, kept there for emergencies and small cash payments. He arranged the stacks visibly, leaving them piled inside the safe with the door wide open. About £40,000, right? There exposed with no protection. Then Robert sat back in his leather armchair, leaned his head back and closed his eyes, as if he were sleeping. But he left his eyelids slightly ajar, just enough to see what was happening around him without being noticed. His heart was pounding. He didn't know what he expected to see. Maybe he expected nothing. Maybe he expected everything. Lucy was in the hallway, pushing her cleaning trolley with that characteristic sound of wheels on the cold floor. He heard her soft voice calling her daughter. The girl was in the reception area as usual. Robert heard small light footsteps approaching. His office door was ajar. He held his breath. The girl came in. She wore a simple, slightly faded dress and a pair of worn trainers, too big for her little feet. Her brown hair was tied in a ponytail that was already a bit crooked. She looked first at Robert, standing in the doorway, as if checking to see if he was really asleep. Then, her eyes turned to the open safe and the piles of money. Robert's heart raced. After everything he had been through, he almost expected the worst. He expected to see that child reach out her hand and take a note, 2 notes, a whole stack. He expected to feel once again that bitter sting of disappointment. But what happened was completely different. The girl walked to the safe with careful steps, as if not wanting to make a sound. She stopped in front of it and looked at the money for a few seconds, tilting her head to one side, thoughtfully. Then she extended her little hands towards the notes. Robert felt a lump in his throat, but she didn't take anything. Instead, she began to organize the stacks. One of them was crooked, slightly askew, and she carefully straightened it. Another was further forward, out of line, and she pushed it back, forming a perfect row. She worked with the same concentration as someone doing a jigsaw puzzle, tidying each pile, aligning every corner. She even ran her small hand along the inner edge of the safe, as if wiping away invisible dust. When she finished, she took 2 small steps back and looked at the result with a discreet smile of satisfaction. It was at that moment she realized Robert was watching her. Her eyes widened in fright, and she jumped back. Robert, still stunned, sat up straight in his chair. His voice came out a bit hoarse when he asked, trying to sound casual, "What were you doing?" The girl bit her lip, shyly. "Sorry, mister. I thought you were sleeping." I was just tidying the money. Tidying it? Yes, it was all messy. My mum always says that messy things don't work right, so I tidied it up to make it work better. Robert blinked a few times, trying to process it. You didn't think about taking any of it? The girl frowned, genuinely confused. Take it? Why? Because there's a lot of money there. But it's not mine, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. My mum taught me that taking what belongs to others is very, very wrong. She says it makes people sad and that God gets angry. And what if no one was looking? Would you still not take it? The girl thought for a moment seriously. No, because I would know, and my mum would know too, because mums find out everything. Robert fell silent, just looking at this 5-year-old child who had just given him the most important lesson he had received in months. There was no calculation there, no cunning, just a disarming purity, an honesty that didn't need an audience to exist. What's your name? He asked, his voice softer. Julia. Julia, you are a very special little girl, do you know that? She shrugged, a little awkwardly. My mum always says that, but I think she only says it because she's my mum. No, Robert said, feeling something tighten in his chest. She says it because it's true. The girl smiled, still shy, and ran out when she heard her mother's voice calling from the hallway. Robert was alone again, looking at the open safe, at the perfectly organized money. Something inside him had changed. It wasn't a loud, dramatic change. It was something subtle, like a light slowly turning on in a dark room. He was still shaken. He still felt anger towards Roger and the others who had betrayed him. But now he knew that not all was lost. There were still honest people in the world, and sometimes those people came wrapped in simple dresses and worn trainers, with little hands that preferred to tidy, rather than to steal. Robert closed the safe, but he didn't lock it. He sat there thinking about Julia, thinking about Lucy, thinking about how sometimes the answers we're looking for are right under our noses in the most unlikely form possible. In the following days, he began to pay more attention. He watched Lucy from a distance with respect without being intrusive. He noticed she was never late, not even by a minute. He noticed she worked in silence, efficiently, without complaining. He noticed that at lunchtime she ate a cold-packed lunch sitting on the emergency stairs because she had to rush off to another job right after. One day, by chance, Robert overheard 2 employees talking about her. They said Lucy lived far away in a borough in East London, and that she took 2 crowded buses to get to work. They said she was raising her daughter alone without anyone's help, and that she cleaned in other places at night and on weekends to make ends meet. Robert felt something stir inside him. It wasn't pity, it was respect. Admiration, perhaps. That woman was fighting alone, working to the point of exhaustion, yet raising a daughter with solid values, with honesty, with character. That was more impressive than any diploma or brilliant CV. He wanted to know more. But he didn't want to invade Lucy's privacy, didn't want to be intrusive or inappropriate. So he discreetly hired a private investigator, not to spy, but just to obtain basic information through legal means. He wanted to better understand their situation, to know if there was anything he could do to help without being meddlesome. The report arrived a few days later, and Robert read it alone at night in the silence of his office. The words written there shook him. Lucy earned 1.5 times the minimum wage per month. She paid rent for a small damp flat with mold on the bedroom walls. She spent a good part of what she earned on medicine because Julia had chronic asthma. The girl had been hospitalized twice in the last year. She needed controlled medication, regular checkups, and a healthier environment than the one she lived in. Robert closed the report and looked out at the city through the huge office windows. The lights of London twinkled in the distance, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle. And there, right beside him, was one of those stories, one he had ignored for so long. He had to do something, not because he felt guilty, but because he felt it was the right thing to do. Because that woman and her daughter had touched something in him that betrayal and disappointment had almost extinguished. They had brought back something he thought he had lost forever, the hope that it was still worth believing in people, the certainty that kindness was not a naive fantasy, but something real, tangible, that existed even in the most unlikely of places. And so on that quiet night, looking at the city lights, Robert Anderson made a decision. He didn't know how he would do it yet, nor exactly what he would do, but he knew he had to help Lucy and Julia, not out of empty charity, not out of guilt, but because they had taught him something precious. They had taught him that even when all seems lost, there is always a reason to keep believing. And sometimes that reason comes in the form of a 5-year-old child who prefers to tidy money rather than take it, because her mother taught her that taking what belongs to others is wrong, and that, Robert realized, was worth more than all the embezzled £800,000. It was worth more than any amount that could be stolen or recovered, because it was something no amount of money could buy. It was proof that genuine goodness still existed in the world, and that this goodness deserved to be protected, valued, and rewarded. He didn't know yet that this decision would change not only Lucy's and Julia's lives, but also his own. He didn't know he was about to embark on a journey that would test his ability to trust, to love, to rebuild what had been broken. But that night, all he knew was that something had changed inside him, and that for the first time in weeks, since discovering Roger's betrayal, he could feel something beyond anger and suspicion. He could feel hope, and that hope had a name. Her name was Julia, and she was only 5 years old, with a simple dress and the most honest little hands Robert had ever seen in his life. Robert spent the next few days observing, not in an invasive or uncomfortable way, but with a renewed attention, like someone who finally removes their blindfold and begins to see what was always there. Lucy continued to arrive early, before the sun had fully risen over London, when the city was still relatively empty, and the air still had that cool, damp freshness of dawn. She would greet the doorman with a discreet nod, take the service lift up, and begin her work with an almost military discipline. Julia came with her 2 or 3 times a week. Robert found out by chatting casually with the receptionist that the girl wasn't attending school regularly because she was often sick. Her asthma attacks prevented her from having a normal routine. There were weeks when she only went for 2 or 3 days and then had to stay home to recover. So, on days when there was no school, or when Julia wasn't well enough to go but not sick enough to stay in bed, Lucy brought her to the office. The girl always behaved with that strange seriousness. She would sit in a corner of the reception area with her drawing pad and colored pencils and stay there for hours, quietly, without bothering anyone. Every now and then she would cough a little, that dry, tired cough that Robert soon learned to recognize as a sign that her chest was wheezing. But even so, Julia didn't complain. She just drew, focused, creating colorful worlds on those white pages. Robert began to walk past the reception more often than necessary. Sometimes he would stop, pretend to check something with the receptionist, and glance at Julia's drawings. She drew houses, always houses. Houses with gardens, houses with flowers, houses with red doors and blue windows, houses that looked like they came from fairy tale books, very different from the grey, damp building where she probably lived. One morning he approached her. Julia looked up, a little surprised, and smiled shyly. "Can I see what you're drawing?" Robert asked, crouching down beside her. Julia nodded and turned the sketchbook towards him. It was a pink house with a pointed roof and a huge tree next to it. "That's very beautiful. Do you like drawing houses?" "I do. One day I'm going to live in a house like this." "Really? And what will this house be like?" Her eyes lit up. "It will have my own room, a really big one with a window where the sun comes in. And it won't have those black marks on the wall that Mummy is always trying to clean. And it will have a garden where I can play without getting out of breath." Robert felt a pang in his chest. This child, so small, was already dreaming of something that should be a basic right, a healthy place to live. "I'm sure one day you will live in a house just like that," he said, lightly touching her head. Julia smiled, but it was a smile that carried a wisdom too sad for a 5-year-old. "Maybe. Mummy says we have to work very hard to get things. She works very hard, you know. Sometimes she comes home and can barely stand up, but she still makes dinner and helps me take my medicine and tells me stories until I fall asleep. Your mother is a very special person." "She is. She's the best mum in the whole world." Robert stayed there for a few minutes, talking to Julia about drawings, about school, about simple things. When he stood up to go back to work, he felt he had to act soon. He couldn't just watch. He had to do something concrete. That afternoon, he called Lucy into his office for a chat. She was visibly nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed down her simple uniform. Robert saw the fear in her eyes and quickly tried to reassure her. "Lucy, please relax. You've done nothing wrong. Quite the opposite. I just wanted to talk to you about something important." She nodded but remained tense, perched on the edge of the chair, as if ready to run at any moment. "I know it's none of my business," Robert began, choosing his words carefully, "but I've heard that your daughter has health problems. Asthma, isn't it?" Lucy looked down. "Yes, sir. She's had it since she was very little. It's gotten a lot better, but she still needs medicine every day and regular checkups. And I also know," he continued, "that you work very hard in several places to manage everything on your own." Her face turned red. She lifted her chin, defensively. "I manage, Mr. Anderson. You don't have to worry. Julia will never interfere with my work here. I only bring her when there's no other way. And she stays quiet. She doesn't touch anything." "I know that, Lucy, and that's not what I want to talk about. I want to help." The silence that followed was heavy. Lucy looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and suspicion. "Help how?" Robert took a deep breath. "I have a very good corporate health plan. I can add you and Julia to it, at no cost to you. That way, she would have access to specialists, better treatments, everything she needs." Lucy was still for a moment, processing the information. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "I can't accept that, sir." "Why not?" "Because I don't accept handouts. I've always managed on my own, and I'll continue to do so. I don't need charity from anyone." "It's not charity, Lucy. It's just help. You work for me. You're a dedicated employee. It makes sense for you to have better benefits." "With all due respect," she said, and her voice now had a firmness Robert hadn't expected, "I know when someone feels sorry for me, and I don't want pity. I just want to work honestly and be paid for my work. If you really want to help me, you can give me a raise. That would be fair, but I won't accept gifts from anyone." Robert was taken aback. He had imagined several scenarios for this conversation, but he hadn't expected such a categorical refusal. He respected it. "You're absolutely right. I'm sorry if I was intrusive." "You don't need to apologize, sir. I appreciate the thought, but I have my pride, and I want my daughter to learn that we achieve things through work, not by accepting favors from others." She stood up, gave a slight nod, and left the room. Robert was left alone, frustrated but also impressed. That woman had a dignity that many people with far more money lacked. She could have easily accepted the help. She could have seen it as an opportunity to ease her difficult life, but she chose to keep her integrity intact, and that only made Robert admire her more. The days passed. Robert tried to respect Lucy's decision, but he couldn't stop thinking about her and Julia. He saw the girl coughing in the reception, saw Lucy pushing the cleaning trolley with an ever more tired face. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how to do it without disrespecting that woman's pride. Then fate decided to intervene in a cruel way. It was an overcast Friday when Lucy arrived at work with red, swollen eyes. She tried to hide it, kept her head down, worked faster than usual, as if trying to hide in her routine. But Robert noticed, and during the day he couldn't help but see her stopping now and then, leaning against a wall in the corridor and taking a deep breath, as if trying to control herself. At the end of the afternoon, when most of the employees had already left, he found her sitting on the emergency stairs, her head in her hands. Julia was beside her, holding her mother's hand, with that serious, worried look. "Lucy, is everything all right?" She lifted her face, tried to smile. "Yes, sir. Just a difficult day." Robert sat on the step beside her. Julia looked at him with those big, dark eyes, and he saw fear there. Real fear. "You can trust me," he said softly. "If something's wrong, I can help. Not as your boss, but as someone who cares." Lucy hesitated for a long time. Then, with a choked voice, she took a folded piece of paper from her uniform pocket and handed it to him. Robert opened it and read. It was an eviction notice, 2 months of rent in arrears. 15 days to pay the debt or vacate the flat. Her voice came out low, ashamed. I used the rent money to buy Julia's medicine. She had a bad attack a few weeks ago and needed more expensive medication. I tried to negotiate with the landlord, asked for more time, but he won't listen. Said he's lost his patience. How much do you owe? £3,200, Robert. Didn't think twice. I'll lend you the money. No, Lucy shook her head firmly. We've already talked about this. I won't accept it. Then it's not a gift, it's a loan. With a contract all official, you pay it back in installments however you can, with interest much lower than any bank would charge. But it's all official, all registered. It's not a favor, Lucy. It's a fair business agreement. She looked at him for a long time, her eyes full of tears she was trying to hold back. I don't know if I can pay it back. You pay it back in your own time. No pressure. The important thing now is not to lose the roof over your heads. If you were in Lucy's place, would you have accepted the help or done something else? Let us know in the comments. Lucy remained silent, fighting an internal battle. Her pride screamed at her to refuse, but the fear of putting her daughter on the street screamed louder. Finally, she nodded, her voice almost inaudible. All right, but I will pay back every penny. I know you will. And it has to be with a proper contract, signed and registered. I don't want to owe anyone a favor. That's exactly how it will be. Robert called his personal lawyer the next day. He explained the situation and asked him to draw up a fair loan agreement with symbolic interest and repayments that Lucy could afford without suffocating financially. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Henry, looked at Robert with a curious expression but asked no questions. He just prepared the documents. On Monday, Robert called Lucy in again. She arrived with Julia, who sat in the waiting area while the adults talked. The contract was read line by line, explained in detail. Lucy asked questions, wanted to make sure she understood everything. When she finally signed, her hands were trembling, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes. I will pay it back, she repeated. You can be sure of it. I know. Robert transferred the money that same afternoon. Lucy paid the overdue rent the next day and managed to negotiate the following month's rent as well to get herself better organized. The eviction was averted. Julia would continue to have a roof over her head, but something deeper had changed between Robert and Lucy. It was no longer just a boss-employee relationship. It was something different, built on a foundation of mutual respect and earned trust. She had seen that he respected her dignity. He had seen that she had values that went beyond any financial difficulty. In the following days, small gestures began to happen. Lucy would sometimes stop by his office door to thank him, briefly and discreetly. Robert started arriving earlier just to chat with her for a few minutes before the workday began. Julia, sensing the change in atmosphere, became more at ease. She started showing her drawings to Robert without shyness, started calling him Uncle Robert. One morning, Julia appeared in his office holding a pink plastic piggy bank. She placed it on his desk with solemn seriousness. What's this, Julia? It's for you, Uncle Robert, to help you not be sad about the money that went away. Robert picked up the piggy bank. It was light, but he could hear a few coins rattling inside. His heart tightened. You don't have to give me your money, Julia. But I want to. Mummy said you had problems with money that disappeared, and I've been saving these coins since my birthday. They're just 10 and 20 pence coins. But if you save a lot of them, it becomes a lot. Robert felt his eyes sting. He held the piggy bank with both hands, as if holding something precious. Thank you, Julia. This is worth more than a lot of money. But do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep this piggy bank here with me in the safest place I have, and when you're a little older, I'll give it back to you, with a surprise inside. Is that okay? Julia thought for a moment, seriously. Okay, but it has to be a good surprise, you know? It will be the best surprise in the world. She ran off, satisfied, leaving Robert alone with the pink piggy bank. He placed it inside the safe, next to the company's most important documents, and for the first time in a long time he felt that the safe didn't just hold money and papers. It held hope. Life went on, but now there was something different in the air. Robert began to notice small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way Lucy always thanked him with her eyes before thanking him, with words. The way Julia drew figures of 3 people holding hands, always 3, never 2. The way sometimes when he arrived very early, he would find Lucy standing by the hallway window, looking down at the city, with an expression of mixed exhaustion and hope. He didn't know yet that this peace was about to be tested in a way none of them expected. He didn't know that a ghost from the past was about to resurface, bringing threats and manipulation with it. He didn't know that everything they had built so far, all that fragile and precious trust, was about to be put at risk. But in that moment, in those days of calm between storms, Robert allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could stay this way. Simple, honest, true. He placed Julia's piggy bank in the safe, closed the door carefully and stood there looking at that small, simple object that represented so much. It represented innocence. It represented kindness. It represented the proof that, even in the cynical, harsh world we live in, pure and selfless gestures still exist. And for the first time since discovering Roger's betrayal, Robert Anderson felt that maybe it was still worth trusting people. Not everyone, of course, but some people. Those who demonstrated through simple, everyday actions that honesty wasn't a calculated performance, but a way of being. Lucy was one of those people. Julia was one of those people. And he was determined to protect them, to help them, not out of charity, but because they had touched something in him that was almost dead. They had touched his ability to believe that not everything in the world is false, that not everyone is only interested in taking advantage, that real, tangible kindness still exists, even without an audience, even without a reward. And this discovery, Robert realized, was what he needed most in this difficult time of his life. It was the antidote to the poison of suspicion that had spread through his veins after the betrayal. It was the proof that it was still worth being human. It was still worth caring. It was still worth trusting. And he was ready to fight for that certainty, no matter what lay ahead. The routine had found a new balance. Robert didn't expect that feeling of peace to last forever, but he also didn't imagine it would be shattered so abruptly and menacingly. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Wednesday afternoon, when Lucy arrived at work with a pale face and hands trembling in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. She tried to work normally, but Robert noticed. He knew the woman well enough by now to know when something was deeply troubling her. Julia wasn't with her that day, which was unusual. Wednesdays were usually the afternoon the girl had no school and would accompany her mother. After hours, when the office was nearly empty, Robert found Lucy, sitting alone in the break room, staring at a cup of cold coffee she hadn't even touched. He sat across from her, saying nothing, just waiting. Sometimes the best way to help someone is simply to be present. Lucy took a few deep breaths, as if gathering her courage. Then finally she spoke. He showed up. Who showed up? Julia's father. The words fell like stones. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. He knew from vague comments that Julia's father was not part of their lives, but he didn't know the details and he had never asked respecting Lucy's privacy. How long has it been since you heard from him? 6 years, since before Julia was born. When I found out I was pregnant and told him, he disappeared. Changed his phone number, moved, never showed his face again. Until yesterday, I didn't even know if he was still in London. And what does he want now? Her voice was bitter. He says he wants to see his daughter, that he has rights, that he made mistakes in the past, but now he wants to be part of her life. And you believe that? Lucy let out a humorless laugh. No, not for a second. You should have seen him, Robert. He didn't look like someone who misses his daughter. He looked like someone calculating his advantages. What do you mean by that? He knows. I don't know how, but he knows you've helped me, that I'm connected to a businessman. He kept asking questions, wanting details, wanting to know if you were supporting me, if there was something between us. It was horrible. He was more interested in my financial situation than in Julia. Robert felt anger rising. Did he threaten you? Lucy nodded, her eyes filling with tears she fought to keep from falling. He said if I don't let him see Julia, he'll get a lawyer. Said he has rights as a father, that he can ask for joint custody. that he can make my life very difficult. Robert, I'm so scared. What if he manages to take my daughter away from me? He won't. How can you be so sure? Because I won't let him, and because the justice system is there to protect children, not to hand them over to opportunists. But he's her biological father. Doesn't that count for anything? It counts. But abandonment also counts. Neglect also counts. And a decent judge will see clearly what's happening here. Lucy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't have money for a lawyer, Robert. I can barely pay the rent with the loan you gave me. How am I supposed to fight him in court? You won't be fighting him alone. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? I have a very good family lawyer, one of the best in London. He'll take your case. I can't afford him. You don't have to pay now. We'll it out later however we can. The important thing is to protect Julia. This man can't just show up after 6 years and demand rights he abandoned before the child was even born. Lucy was silent for a long moment. Then, in a small voice, she asked, Why are you doing all this for me? For us? Robert thought about the answer. He could say many things. He could talk about how Julia had restored his faith in people. He could talk about how he admired Lucy's strength and dignity. He could talk about how, in some strange and unexpected way, the two of them had become important to him in a way that went beyond any professional relationship. But what he said was simple and true. Because you deserve it, and because I can help. Is that so hard to understand? She shook her head, unable to speak, the tears now falling freely. Robert reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched so deliberately, so intimately. Her hands were small and rough from so much work. His were large and warm. And in that moment, in that simple gesture, something changed. Between them. Something neither of them was ready to name yet, but that they both felt. The next day, Robert called his lawyer. Henry Carter was a man in his early 50s, serious, competent, with decades of experience in family law. When Robert explained the situation, Henry listened attentively, asking pointed questions, and in the end agreed to take the case. I'll need to speak with your employee in person. I'll need documents, proof of abandonment, anything she has that proves this man was not part of the child's life for these 6 years. She has it. Old messages trying to get child support that was never paid. Medical records from the girl's hospital stays, all without his name, all signed only by her. Even a police report from a time he showed up drunk at her building causing a scene. That was about 3 years ago. Henry noted everything down. Excellent. The more documentation, the better. And the child. How is she handling this? She barely knows what's happening. Her mother is trying to protect her from all of it. Good. That's for the best for now. But eventually she may need to be interviewed by a psychologist or social worker, depending on how things develop. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. The idea of Julia having to go through questioning, having to relive traumas, distressed him, but he knew it might be necessary. The meeting with Lucy was set for the following Saturday at a quiet cafe in the city centre. Robert accompanied her, more for moral support than anything else. Henry was kind but direct. He asked difficult questions about her relationship with Julia's father, about the pregnancy, the abandonment, the years that followed. Lucy answered everything with painful honesty, reliving memories she clearly wanted to forget. She spoke of how she found out about the pregnancy at 23, how she was in love and thought the baby's father would be happy. She talked about how he reacted with anger, accusing her of getting pregnant on purpose to trap him, saying he didn't want that responsibility. She talked about how he simply disappeared overnight, blocking her number, moving, avoiding any place they might run into each other. She talked about having Julia alone in a public hospital with no one by her side. She talked about the sleepless nights with a crying baby, about the bills she couldn't pay, about the expensive asthma medication that started when Julia was just a year old. She talked about how she tried a few times to contact him through mutual acquaintances, asking for help, asking for at least a little financial support, and how he always ignored her, always brushed it off, always disappeared again. And now he's back, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. After 6 years, he just shows up at my door as if nothing happened. And you know the worst part? He didn't ask how Julia is. He didn't ask if she's healthy, if she's happy, if she needs anything. The first thing he wanted to know was if I was earning more money now, if I had a rich boyfriend, if I was being supported. It's disgusting. Henry meticulously wrote everything down. Can you prove these attempts at contact? Messages, emails, anything? I have some old messages, yes. And I have the testimony of a neighbor who was there that day. He showed up drunk at the building. She witnessed everything, even called the police. Perfect. I'll need copies of all those messages, and I'll need to speak with this neighbor. And I'll need Julia's medical records too, especially from the asthma-related hospital stays. Lucy nodded. I'll bring everything. Another thing, Henry continued. It's likely he will indeed go to court asking for joint custody, or at least a visitation schedule. When that happens, we will be prepared. We'll show the judge his history. We'll show that his motivation is not the child's well-being, but financial interest, or some kind of manipulation. And what if the judge sides with him? Henry's voice became firm. If we present the case well with all the evidence, that's highly unlikely. The British justice system has evolved a lot in protecting children in situations like this. What matters is not just biology, but the child's best interests. And clearly, Julia's best interest is to stay with the mother who has always cared for her, not with a father who abandoned her and only returned when he realized there might be some benefit for him. Robert, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke. What are you going to charge for this work, Henry? The lawyer looked at him, then at Lucy, and gave a discreet smile. We'll sort out the fees after the case is resolved. Don't worry about that now. But I need to know what I'll owe, Lucy insisted. I don't want any surprises at the end. Henry sighed. Mrs. Scott, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because I have a daughter Julia's age, and I can't imagine what it would be like to see an opportunistic father trying to destroy her peace. So forget about the fees for now. Let's focus on winning this case. Lucy looked at Robert, who just nodded. She took a deep breath and extended her hand to Henry. Thank you, truly. The preparation for the case began. Lucy gathered all the evidence she could find, screenshots of old conversations, bank statements showing she had never received child support, documents from the school and the clinic where Julia was treated, all with only the mother's name as the guardian. The neighbor, a 60-year-old woman named Mrs. Davis, gave a detailed statement about the day Julia's father showed up drunk at the building, shouting in the hallway, frightening the residents. Robert helped where he could, organizing documents, paying for certified copies, accompanying Lucy to meetings. And throughout this process, he saw the fear growing in her eyes, fear of losing her daughter, fear that the justice system wouldn't see the truth, fear that in the end, the fact that the man was the biological father would weigh more heavily than all the years of abandonment. And then, 2 weeks after the first meeting with Henry, the notice arrived. Julia's father, whose name was Daniel Fisher, had indeed filed a court case. He was requesting joint custody, claiming he had been unfairly kept from his daughter, that he had been a victim of parental alienation, that he had always wanted to be part of her life, but was prevented from doing so. Lucy read the initial petition and felt her legs give way. Robert was beside her when it happened and caught her before she could fall. He's lying, she whispered. He's lying about everything. How can he do this? Because people without character always lie when it suits them, Robert replied. But the truth will come out. I promise you. That night, something happened that changed everything. Daniel showed up at Lucy's building again. She was at home with Julia making dinner when she heard the doorbell ring insistently. She looked through the peephole and felt her blood run cold. It was him. She didn't open the door. She told him through the intercom that he had to leave, that she had a lawyer now, that any contact had to be made officially. But Daniel didn't leave. He stayed there, banging on the door, shouting that he wanted to see his daughter, that he had a right to see his daughter, that she was disrespecting his rights. The noise frightened Julia. The little girl started to cry, asking who that man was, why he was shouting. And then, with the shock and stress, came the attack. Julia started to cough, a desperate cough, her chest wheezing loudly, her lips starting to turn blue. It was a severe asthma attack triggered by fear. Lucy panicked. She used the inhaler, tried to calm her daughter, but the attack wouldn't subside. Daniel kept shouting in the hallway. Julia still couldn't breathe properly. Mrs. Davis, the neighbor, heard the commotion and called the police. And Lucy, desperate, called Robert. He answered on the first ring. "Lucy," her voice came out in panicked, broken gasps. "Robert, I need help. Julia is having a bad attack, and he's here at the door shouting, scaring her. I don't know what to do." Robert didn't think twice. "Call an ambulance now. I'm on my way. What's the exact address?" She gave him the address, her voice trembling. Robert grabbed his car keys and ran. He lived about 40 minutes away, but he made the journey in 25, running every yellow light, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived at the building, there was a police car out front and an ambulance parked. Robert ran up the stairs. In the hallway, he found Daniel being restrained by 2 police officers, shouting that he was the father, that he had rights, that they were trying to stop him from seeing his daughter. Robert walked straight past him without a glance and entered the flat. Lucy was sitting on the living room floor, holding Julia in her arms. The girl was wearing an oxygen mask, being attended to by paramedics. Her eyes were wide with fear, tears streaming down her pale little face. Robert knelt beside them. "It's going to be okay, Julia. You're going to be okay." Julia reached out her little hand to him, and Robert held it. The girl's mother looked at him with painful gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for coming. Always." The paramedics managed to stabilize Julia there, but they recommended she go to the hospital for observation. Robert insisted on taking them in his car, following the ambulance. At the hospital, Julia was admitted overnight for observation. Robert stayed there with them, buying coffee for Lucy, talking quietly to Julia to distract her, holding both their hands when the fear became too much. It was during that long night at the hospital that Robert realized something he had been feeling for weeks but had never admitted even to himself. He cared about these 2. It wasn't just compassion, it wasn't just a desire to help. It was something deeper, more intense. It was real affection. It was care. It was, perhaps, even love beginning to blossom in a quiet and inevitable way. And when Lucy rested her head on his shoulder, exhausted, and whispered a hoarse "thank you," he knew she felt the same. That something was being born there in the midst of all that pain and fear. Something good, something true, something worth protecting with all his strength. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the East London Family Court. Lucy had barely slept in the preceding nights, imagining every possible scenario, every argument Daniel could use, every way it could all go wrong. Robert tried to reassure her, but he knew that words are not always enough against the fear of losing a child. Henry was waiting for them at the courthouse entrance, elegant in his dark suit, his leather briefcase filled with meticulously organized documents. He greeted Lucy with a firm, confident handshake. "Everything is ready. We have a solid case. Trust me." Julia had stayed with Mrs. Davis, the neighbor, who had offered to look after her during the hearing. Lucy didn't want her daughter anywhere near that place, that moment. She wanted to protect her from it all, even though she knew that, eventually, Julia would have to understand what was happening. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, with white walls and a long table where the judge would sit. On one side, Lucy, Henry, and Robert. On the other, Daniel and his lawyer, a young man in a cheap suit with the expression of someone who knew he had a weak case, but had to feign confidence. Daniel looked different from how Lucy remembered, older with a few wrinkles around his eyes, his hair starting to thin. But it was the same expression she recognized, that calculating gaze of someone always weighing the odds, always looking for the best move. He didn't look at her with affection or regret. He looked at her as if she were an obstacle that needed to be removed. The judge entered, a woman in her early 50s, her grey hair tied in an elegant bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain. She had the expression of someone who had seen it all in her years on the bench and was not easily fooled. Everyone stood and she asked them to be seated. "Let's begin." The judge looked at the documents before her. "Mr. Daniel Fisher has filed a motion for joint custody of the minor, Julia Scott, alleging that he was unfairly prevented from having contact with his daughter. The mother, Mrs. Lucy Scott, contests this, alleging paternal abandonment since before the child's birth. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, both lawyers replied. Very well. I will hear from the applicant first. Mr. Fisher, can you please explain why you were absent from your daughter's life for 6 years? Daniel sat up straight, adopting a victim-like posture that seemed rehearsed. Your Honor, I want to make it clear that I never wanted to be away from Julia. What happened was that Lucy and I broke up on very bad terms. She was very angry, very aggressive. I tried to maintain contact, but she blocked me from everything, changed her phone number, made any approach difficult. Henry stood up immediately. Your Honor, with all due respect, that is a lie that I will prove with documents. May I ask my questions? The judge nodded. You may. Henry turned to Daniel with a neutral expression, but his eyes were sharp. Mr. Fisher, do you have any proof that you attempted to contact the child's mother in these 6 years? Messages, emails, letters, recorded phone calls? Daniel hesitated. I tried through mutual friends. Names of these friends, please. Daniel stammered a few vague names. Henry wrote them down. We will check on that. Now tell me, did you pay any amount of child support during these 6 years? No, because she never officially asked for it. Henry opened his folder and took out several sheets of paper. I have here screenshots duly certified of messages my client sent to you on 3 separate occasions over the last 6 years, asking for financial help for the child. Did you respond to any of these messages? Daniel turned red. I don't remember. You don't remember? Henry passed the sheets to the judge, who examined them closely. There are 3 clear messages, Your Honor, sent at different times, asking for help with medicine, with nappies, with the child's basic expenses. None of them received a response. Furthermore, in one of them, my client informs him that the child was hospitalized with a severe asthma attack. No response from the father. The judge looked at Daniel with an expression that clearly showed disapproval. Continue, counsel. Henry turned back to Daniel. Mr. Fisher, when was the last time you saw your daughter? Daniel swallowed hard. She was very little. I don't remember exactly. Let me refresh your memory. According to the records, you have never seen your daughter. You were not present at the birth, you did not go to the hospital, you did not visit the child when she was born. Am I correct? Daniel did not answer. The silence was eloquent. Henry continued. And now, 6 years later, you suddenly appear requesting joint custody. Can you tell us what prompted this change of heart? I've matured. I realized I want to be a part of her life. Henry smiled humorlessly. Interesting. And this newfound maturity has nothing to do with the fact that you learned through acquaintances that the child's mother now works for a successful businessman and has access to better financial conditions. Daniel's lawyer stood up. Objection, Your Honor. That's speculation. It is not speculation, counsel. Henry pulled another document from his folder. I have here the statement of a neighbor, Mrs. Davis, who witnessed a conversation in which Mr. Fisher questioned the child's mother specifically about her financial situation and her supposed relationship with a wealthy businessman. The neighbor states that Mr. Fisher seemed more interested in her finances than in the child. The judge looked at Daniel again. Is this true, Mr. Fisher? I just wanted to know how they were doing, if they were okay. Henry was relentless. And on the day you showed up at my client's building, causing a disturbance and shouting, frightening the child to the point of triggering an asthma attack that resulted in a hospital stay, were you also just wanting to know how they were? The judge's expression grew stern. There was a hospitalization because of this. Yes, Your Honor. Henry passed over more documents. Here is the medical report. The child has chronic asthma and any emotional stress can trigger severe attacks. The father's aggressive behavior in the building's corridor caused intense fear in the child, resulting in a crisis that required emergency medical attention. The judge read the document, then looked at Daniel with clear disapproval. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Daniel tried to look remorseful. I was upset, Your Honor. I was being prevented from seeing my daughter. Any father would be upset. Any present father, perhaps, the judge said coldly, "but you have not been a present father from what I can see in these documents. Counsel for the defense, would you like to question the mother?" Daniel's lawyer asked Lucy a few questions, trying to paint a picture of her as negligent or opportunistic. But Lucy answered everything calmly and honestly, showing receipts for rent payments, medicine purchases, school supplies. She showed records that she worked 3 different jobs to support her daughter. She showed that Julia was well cared for, well fed, and attended school when her health permitted. Henry made his closing statement. "Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of opportunism. Mr. Daniel Fisher abandoned the pregnant mother, never paid child support, and never showed any interest in the child for 6 years. Now, upon learning that the mother has access to better conditions, he suddenly appears demanding rights he voluntarily relinquished. Even more seriously, his behavior has caused physical harm to the child, triggering an asthma attack that could have been fatal. To request joint custody under these conditions is not responsible parenting. It is an attempt to take advantage of a vulnerable situation." Daniel's lawyer tried to argue that every father deserves a second chance, that the biological bond is important, that Daniel had changed. But his arguments sounded hollow in the face of the evidence. The judge spent several minutes reading all the documents in silence. Finally, she took off her glasses and looked at everyone in the room. "I will deliver my decision now orally, and the final judgment will be issued later." She turned to Daniel. "Mr. Daniel Fisher, it is clear to me that your motivation is not the child's well-being, but rather some secondary benefit you imagine you might obtain. The documents show complete abandonment, absolute neglect, and most seriously behavior that has caused physical harm to the minor. The request for joint custody is denied." Lucy felt tears stream down her face. Robert squeezed her hand. The judge continued. "Furthermore, retroactive child support is established for the 6 years of abandonment in an amount to be calculated by the court accountant, in addition to regular monthly payments of 30% of Mr. Fisher's income. Any contact with the minor is conditional upon prior psychological assessment of the father and the child, subject to the mother's authorization. Should Mr. Fisher refuse to pay the established support, appropriate measures will be taken, including asset seizure and registration on defaulter lists." She banged her gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." Daniel left the courthouse with his face red with anger and humiliation, more concerned about the defeat and the support he would have to pay than about the daughter he never knew. His lawyer tried to calm him down, but he pushed the man away and stormed off. Outside the courthouse, Lucy collapsed into Robert's arms, crying with relief. Henry smiled discreetly and patted her on the shoulder. "It's over. He won't bother you anymore." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "No need to thank me. It was a pleasure to represent you." In the months that followed, Lucy and Julia's lives changed in concrete and profound ways. Robert, seeing the dedicated and honest work Lucy had always shown, decided to promote her. She went from being a cleaner to the coordinator of the General Services and Facilities team for the company. With the new position came a significantly better salary, benefits including full health insurance for her and Julia, and most importantly, recognition and respect. Lucy accepted the promotion with tears in her eyes and the promise that she would work hard to deserve the opportunity. And she delivered. She proved to be an efficient, organized coordinator who treated her team well and solved problems with intelligence and dedication. With the better salary and the child support that Daniel was forced to pay, albeit grudgingly, Lucy was able to move. She found a larger area flat without damp in a more established neighborhood. The new home had a room for Julia, with a big window where the sun streamed in, exactly as the girl dreamed of in her drawings. Julia began to receive proper treatment for her asthma. With the right medication, regular checkups, and living in a healthier environment, the attacks drastically decreased. The girl started to gain weight, color returned to her cheeks, and she began to run and play without immediately getting breathless. And through a recommendation from Robert, she got a place in a better private school, where she was stimulated and cared for. It was at this new school that Julia discovered something magical: ballet. The school offered dance classes twice a week, and Julia was enchanted from the very first day. Robert, noticing the sparkle in the girl's eyes, gave her a pink leotard and ballet slippers. Julia treated the uniform as if it were a treasure, storing it carefully, wearing it with reverence. On Saturday mornings, Julia had her ballet class, and Robert never missed a single performance. He would sit on the small bleachers in the dance studio, along with other parents, applauding when Julia did her clumsy but joyful pirouettes. The girl would always search for his face in the audience, and when she found it, her smile would grow even wider. Lucy also began to blossom in ways she hadn't expected. With less financial pressure, with a more stable life, she began to relax. The shoulders that had always carried the weight of the world seemed lighter now. She smiled more. Sometimes she even laughed, a free and beautiful laugh that made Robert realize how young she still was, how hard life had been on her from too early an age. And between Robert and Lucy, something grew naturally and inevitably. There was no dramatic declaration, no cinematic kiss in the rain. It was something more subtle, more profound. It was built in conversations after work, in coffees shared on Saturdays before Julia's ballet class, in gazes that lingered a little longer than necessary, in hands that met and no longer let go. It was built on trust, on mutual respect, on genuine admiration. Lucy admired Robert's kindness, his generosity without ulterior motives, his ability to see beyond appearances. Robert admired Lucy's strength, her unwavering dignity, her fierce love for her daughter, her honesty that wouldn't bend even in the face of the greatest hardships. One Sunday, almost a year after that afternoon when Julia had tidied the money in the safe, Robert invited Lucy and Julia for a walk in Hyde Park. It was a sunny day, rare for London, and the park was full of families, children running, kites flying in the blue sky. Julia ran ahead, chasing pigeons, laughing, free. Lucy and Robert walked behind side by side, their fingers almost touching. "Are you happy?" Robert asked suddenly. Lucy looked at him, surprised by the question. She thought for a moment. "I am, for the first time in a very long time. I'm truly happy." "And you?" He smiled. "Me too. You two taught me that it's still worth believing in people. You taught me that kindness truly exists. You saved my soul, in a way." "I think we saved each other." Robert stopped walking and turned to face her. "Lucy, I know all this started in an unusual way. I know the difference between our lives was immense, but I care about you. I care a lot. And it's not pity. It's not charity. It's something real. Do you feel the same?" Lucy felt, her eyes well up with tears. "I do. I'm scared, but I do." "Scared of what?" "That one day you'll realize you could have someone better. Someone who doesn't come with so much weight, so much baggage." Robert touched her face gently. "You are not a weight, Lucy. You're the lightest thing that has ever entered my life. And your baggage? It's part of who you are. It's part of what made you the incredible woman standing in front of me." And then, finally, he kissed her. It was a soft, careful kiss, full of promises. Julia, who had come, running back, saw them and giggled. "Are you boyfriend and girlfriend now?" Robert and Lucy pulled apart, laughing. "We are. What do you think of that?" Julia jumped for joy. "I think it's great. Now we're a real family." And it was true. They were a family. Not in the traditional way, not the way it is in films or soap operas, but they were a real family, built on a solid foundation of trust, respect, and true love. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, Robert called Julia into his office. The girl, now 6, came in skipping, curious. "Uncle, Robert, what is it?" He opened the safe and took out the pink piggy bank Julia had given him over a year ago. "Remember this?" Her eyes widened. "My piggy bank! You really kept it." "I did, and I promised I would give it back with a surprise. Are you ready to see?" Julia nodded excitedly. Robert turned the piggy bank over and poured its contents onto the desk. But it wasn't just the coins Julia had put in there. Along with them, notes fell out. Lots of notes. Robert had filled the piggy bank with money. "This is for you," he said, "for when you grow up, to pay for your university or to make any dream you have come true. It's my thank you for teaching me that there's still goodness in the world." Julia looked at the money, at Uncle Robert, and then did something unexpected. She pushed the piggy bank back towards him. You don't have to, Uncle. You've already given me lots of things. You gave me good medicine, a good school, ballet lessons, and more importantly, you made my mum happy again. That's worth more than any money. Robert felt a lump in his throat. But I want you to have it. Then keep it for me, and when I grow up and need it, you can give it to me. For now, leave it there in the safe. That way I know it's safe. He smiled, moved, and placed the piggy bank back in the safe. It's a deal. In the office above Robert's desk, there was now a simple frame with one of Julia's drawings. It was a picture of 3 people holding hands, a woman, a child, and a tall man. Underneath, in handwriting that was still childish but already firmer, it said, "My real family." And that's how Robert felt. Finally, after so long, after so much suspicion and pain, he had a family. Not by blood, not by paper, but by choice, by love, by trust rebuilt brick by brick. The safe that once held only money and documents now held something far more precious. The memory of a 5-year-old child who chose to tidy rather than to steal. The proof that kindness exists. The certainty that it's worth believing in people. And every time Robert looked at that safe, at that pink piggy bank, at that drawing on the wall, he remembered that sometimes the greatest riches are not measured in money. They are measured in a child's smile, in hands that hold each other, in trust that is rebuilt, in families that are formed not by obligation, but by true love. The story of Robert, Lucy, and Julia was proof that even when all seems lost, when betrayal destroys faith in people, there is always an opportunity to start over. There is always a chance to find goodness in the most unlikely of places. There is always hope, and that hope had a name. It was called family. A chosen family, a built family, a true family. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Lucy, and Julia has touched your heart. If you were moved, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul. We'll see you in the next episode.